So, good morning again and welcome. We begin by expressing our gratitude to the land, the four directions and elements, the air, water, sun, moon, and to the Duwamish and Salish people, and to all indigenous people everywhere who have cared for this earth for millennia. My name is Jordan. I'm joined by Iris, my co-host, and Ken, our technical support person. We live in a time of social upheaval and ecological breakdown. Climate scientists warn that our planet is rapidly approaching ecological tipping points that once passed could so radically alter conditions on Earth that 90% of all life may go extinct, including humans. There is so much that we need to do and undo in order to heal the web of life, and those actions need to be grounded in a deep understanding of the mutual interconnectedness of all life. Today, we're very fortunate to have Kritee Kanko with us, sharing her unique perspective as both a climate scientist and a Zen priest and activist. Kritee is the founding Dharma teacher of Boundless in Motion. She believes in identifying and releasing our personal and ecological grief and bringing our gifts into strategic collective actions for societal healing. She is a sensei in the Rinzai Zen lineage of Cold Mountain and a co-founder of Rocky Mountain Eco-Dharma Retreat Center, as well as Boulder Eco-Dharma Sangha. As a senior scientist in the climate program of the Environmental Defense Fund, she helps implement climate-smart farming at scale in India. Kritee is based in Boulder, which recently had a mass shooting in which she lost people she knew, and she has family and community ties in India, where COVID is now exploding with 300,000 new cases per day. In so many ways, she is on the front lines of this global emergency we face, and I know that I speak for all of us here, Kritee, in offering our prayers and energy of the compassionate Buddha that we can support you, your family, and your work. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Uh, I really appreciate the blessings and metta that I heard in your last few sentences. We are a small group today, and I'm seeing some old friends, some very old acquaintances. Hi, Joe. There's Sangha members and people who've taken courses with me in the past, Choren and Toko and Jiva. Hello, everyone. I want to acknowledge that I am in a state of grief last few days, and I don't want to hide it because it takes energy to hide it. Um, uh, what is happening in India at the moment is personally, deeply, it's like a dagger in my heart, and it's just being, you know, rotated around because I've spent many nights in the last week trying to arrange oxygen and medicines for fairly well-to-do people. It's not a limitation of money. It's just the crumbling infrastructure, corruption, international patent laws, and so on. Um, so if I tear up, please don't think that I'm needing anything. My need is only not to hide my pain, either about what's happening in India or the larger ecological crisis or climate crisis. Yeah. So don't feel like anything needs to happen. If my tears resonate with you and you want to grieve, you are welcome to. So the topic that I've chosen to give today's talk is Dharma of Resistance, and um, Dharma of Resistance is a koan in itself, and I'll tell you why I think that. Are people familiar with the word koan? Some of you might not have heard. In the Zen tradition, the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism that came from Japan to the Western shores, koans are paradoxical comments or stories or questions that are supposed to put our discriminating thinking mind in a bind. You can't find your way into these koans. You can't find a resolution if you're just trying to solve it in an intellectual way. So they are inherently paradoxical, and they are tools for awakening. And Dharma of Resistance phrase is a koan, is paradoxical teaching in itself. The reason I say that is because um, if you're familiar with Buddhism, one of the fundamental teachings our great teacher Buddha gave us is that our suffering can we basically we can ease our suffering when you touch into no self, right? No self, anatta. And when there's no self, no ego, in one way to interpret is that there is no resistance, right? No self, no resistance. And so Buddha's fundamental teaching was that more and more you can tap into that no self, uh, and ultimately the source of consciousness itself, you wouldn't feel suffering. But here we are saying, well, there is a dharma in resisting, right? So that's the koan I'm talking about. There is a dharma of resistance. Um, Needless to say, but Buddha just didn't talk about no self. Buddha also talked fiercely about compassion, because once you've touched into no self, ultimately into big self or shunyata, you feel boundless compassion. And so Buddha's moral code that the Vinaya is full of. Vinaya is collection of Buddhist teachings on how to live your life as monks or lay people. Uh, um, that's full of these guidelines, call them rules, on how to live compassionately, right? Uh, but one thing I want to highlight here again, in this sense of this modern paradox that we have in front of us, is that Buddha, at least in Buddha's time, Buddha did not talk about systems of oppression. The frameworks for understanding our state of uh, the state that we find ourselves in at a systemic level didn't exist. I've been reading Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations of earliest Pali Sutras, and Buddha's understanding of society was basically that it is based on uh, relationships, simple relationships, parents and child, you know, wife and husband, teacher and student, lay people and monks. And Buddha understood, this is a quote I believe from Bhikkhu Bodhi's book, Buddha understood every community's well-being to be dependent on the state of mind and actions of involved individuals in the context of these simple relationships, right? And these relationships, these six simple relationships, did not include relationship between a citizen and a king, right? So there is no discussion of, well, Buddha did talk to monarchs from time to time, and this is how you can live an ethical life as a king. But Buddha did not question monarchy per se. The system of monarchy was in question. Buddha understood very deeply that the caste system that existed in India at the time is deeply flawed, like the the the, the systems are created by human beings. He negated that caste system is something divine and it needs to be honored the way Brahmins at the time uh, asked communities to do, right? But Buddha did not reject caste system in its entirety, or certainly never resisted it. Okay. um, and I think and we'll unpack this more and more as we go on. I think if Buddha were alive today, he would be with us resisting. And it would be a unique kind of resistance, right? It would be unique kind of resistance because Buddha talked again and again and again about skillful means, right? So what is what is reality today? What are the unique conditions that have created the mess we are in today? I'm sure Buddha would have analyzed them skillfully and incorporated things that we are going to touch upon. uh, I of course cannot claim that anything I share is going to be unique. This is what I am presenting is a synthesis of years, decades, centuries of work of elders who have gone before me. I would be touching on things that Jiva has talked about. I'm sure I would be referencing things you might have created, but I don't even know how to ascribe them to a single person. So, so not claiming my analysis to be unique, but uh, but putting things together, braiding them, hope, and I'm hoping it will make sense. Yeah. So with that, uh, just inviting a pause because I'm noticing I have speeded up myself. I am going to take frequent pauses as I present different sections of my talk. And I'm going to share my screen and then take away the share screen function and ask for your reflections. Okay? So I'll start with the first piece now. If someone can gives me a thumbs up if you can see the slides, that will be helpful. Okay. The way I frame these offerings is what I like to say is that we have 3 or 4 major challenges that we need to handle at once. Um, if if you were an Indian mother, you can imagine a black mom who doesn't have too many resources, and that mom has a sick child who needs medicine at home. um, she has to pick up groceries from store, and she has to uh, drop her husband to work. Let's say there are 3 tasks and she has very limited resources. She is not going to take 3 trips to take care of these 3 things. She's gonna take a single trip, drop mom to hospital, take husband to work, and on the way pick up things that the child might need. What I'm trying to make a case for is that we have multiple challenges and our solutions have to be designed in a way we address 3 or 4 challenges at once. And I'm here going to talk about challenge number 1. In our country, we have 1 in 3 people who have witnessed domestic violence as kids. So if there are 16 people here, at least 5, uh, well, 1/3, yeah, 5 and 6 have witnessed domestic violence. 1 in 4 have alcoholic relatives. relatives doesn't mean distant relatives. It means most of the times parents. 1 in 4 have been beaten up to the points that they have marks on their bodies as kids. Okay? And 1 in 5 have been sexually molested. I know sometimes people feel when I present these statistics that that I have made them a statistic. That is certainly not my intention. I'm trying to see all of us, trying to make visible what's always there, but we don't talk about it. Okay? And on top of this, this is the basic trauma. This is the basement of trauma structures we have around us. On top of this, there is racial trauma, gender-based violence, and climate trauma, right? And we will pause and take reflections in a minute. The point I want to make is this was just statistics on the US. If you talk about India, the statistics on sexual abuse among kids is just unbelievable. 60-70% of people have had sexual abuse as kids. Like, how are we going to ask that giant country of India, that is the 4th largest emitter of greenhouse gases and could become the largest or 2nd largest in a couple of decades, if the people are fundamentally traumatized? So what I tell all of us is that there is no one outside of you and me who's going to solve it. Yes, we are either traumatized or we are dealing with people who are traumatized. So we have to find a way to face and compost our trauma. Yeah? If you feel like moving your body in any ways as I'm sharing, I highly encourage it, because the kind of things we talk about in climate circles is they are hard. So I want us to keep breathing and move so that this doesn't get stuck in us, right? So please allow your body to rock, allow your heads and neck to move, and most of all, please keep breathing. Please do keep breathing. So what I'm saying is there is no group of non-traumatized people outside of us that is going to lead us. And this is so crucial. We'll come back to why this is important. This trauma that we just talked about, it damages our ability to stay in relationships. This is not just harming individuals. It's harming that fundamental glue that binds us to each other and makes us a collective. This trauma is damaging our ability to form a movement. And we'll come back to this. Okay? And the last thing I like to say before we take comments is I have personally benefited from professional psychotherapy. True. But the scale of trauma, my understanding is that it is so deep, so vast, that one-on-one psychotherapy, even if we poured in a lot of money into psychotherapy, schools and students and research, is not going to be enough. It is not enough for what is going on right now. And as we keep going deeper into climate crisis, ecological crisis, it's going to be absolutely inadequate. Okay? So what I have said here is that we have vast amount of trauma. I'm going to stop sharing and take some comments now. We have vast amounts of trauma. So our challenge number 1 is whatever we do, forget about climate, forget about racial justice. I'm saying the fundamental challenge we face is how are we going to work with this scale of trauma? Okay? Whatever we design, whatever solutions we design have to address this vastness and depth of trauma. So, deep breath. And what I'm gonna ask you to do, take a minute or two to just think about your own life. See, you can close your eyes if that feels okay. How, what do these statistics mean for you, for your own life? You know people who've gone through this? Can you think about how it impacts their ability to listen to you talking about climate? Can you imagine that climate denial comes from trauma? And how does this trauma impact your own ability to keep thinking about climate? Just gonna mute myself for less than a minute and then let's take 2 or 3 comments. Just reflections, not questions. I'm not looking for questions right away. Any reflections that come up. We will have a lot more time for deeper questions later on. For now, looking for short reflections. Short reflections.
I have a short reflection because I really appreciate this multivalent view of trauma and relationships. And I think what often gets overlooked is the relationship we have with ourselves. And that's the one that is impacted by all traumas. And for me, that's why it's so crucial to spend time on a cushion, whatever your spiritual tradition is, and in contemplation or prayer, to really see how that relationship with our true self is impaired and hobbled by all these other impaired relationships.
Thank you so much, Jiva.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment myself. I mean, I've done a lot of meditation, a lot of wilderness time, and professional therapy, and and also activism. And it just underscores the skillful means aspect of engaging in climate justice work is the need to keep doing this work on our own healing of self-trauma, as you and Jiwa have both mentioned, in order to be effective, to connect with other people and bridge that chasm that separates us, to have compassion for their trauma and not just, striking out from the angry, defensive, traumatized place that was the small child or whatever trauma we're still carrying.
What comes to mind to me is just feelings of powerlessness and how easily climate brings up that feeling and how that's related to having experienced childhood trauma. And we see a lot of traumatized people in the activist movement. And I think part of that is the sensitivity that they have to their environment, and they understand what instability means.
Thank you so much, Grace. That's the heart of it, right? Activists are traumatized, leaders are traumatized. They manifest those impacts in different ways, right? So, like this trauma informed activism, like what would that really be? It's one thing to recognize that there is this trauma, right? In ourselves, in our friend circles, in our activist circles, and then it's like, how do we act? I think this is a cutting edge of exploration. How do we act in trauma informed ways? How does our spiritual practice become trauma informed? it it took me a really long time to understand that some people should never be asked to close their eyes when they meditate, because they are being asked to shut up and sit down, when that might have been something that traumatized them as a child. Let's take one more comment from Ruby, and then we will continue with other threads.
What comes to mind for me, after like a year of COVID and being a caregiver, a home care caregiver, and also a racial justice activist, and the level of overwork and constantly grieving and constantly trying to this emergency response every day for and so much grieving within and with folks, and the now as the last year of the daily intentional cruelty from the Trump administration, and COVID starting to be less of a threat, I can just feel as my nervous system and the nervous system of people around me starts to re-regulate more, it's a lot easier to see it's a lot easier to envision the aspects of long-term resistance rather than just keep responding, and that 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 it's a tactic to prevent resistance by having to creating conditions that we have to keep responding to as emergencies.
Thank you, Ruby. Yeah, it is true that things have calmed down some in the US. And I can tell you that, like, I have never felt the extent of helplessness I personally feel in this last week, because of how much real begging I have seen in my own family and friend circles, just to get basic medical supplies and oxygen. And so there is a part of me which believes that we have to learn to resist while we are being traumatized. I think the climate crisis is not gonna get abated. The the promises that Biden administration has done recently, this last few days, they are a bit better than what Obama administration had offered, and there will be some work that will be done, and we are already 1 degree Celsius above the historical geological scale average of temperature. We will continue to have very extreme weather events, right? So in some ways, we have to work with our personal trauma, this ecological climate trauma, the word I've learned from Jiva, phrase I've learned from Jiva. We really should call it climate trauma and not climate grief. uh, I don't see it getting lesser over time. We need resilience while in the midst of typhoons and hurricanes and storms, right? If not pandemics. So I'm going to share my screen again, move on to the next part. I do ask you once again to remember to breathe, to get up, get a glass of water, and not allow this to get stuck in your system. Let's keep moving. Okay. So what I'm moving to now, can you see the slides if you can? Okay. Challenge number 2 is the scale of ecological and climate trauma. And I have talked about this science piece at a lot of length and depth in some of my YouTube videos. I'm just gonna cover some very basic things because they are important for what we'll come to later. Um, Before I go on, let me ask you, you can respond in the chat. I hope the chats, we can make the chats open. Uh, or actually a chat would be the best. What do you think is the average footprint of someone living in America with respect to their carbon dioxide emissions? So don't think about the global, the countrywide emissions or citywide emissions. What are you personally responsible for, given what you eat, how you drive, how you heat your home? The units of carbon dioxide emissions are in kilograms or tons or pounds, right? So is it 5,000 pounds per year, 20,000 pounds per year, 60,000 pounds per year? Take a guess and put it in the chat. If you know the answer, you've heard my talk before, you're not allowed to do this. Take a guess if you haven't taken a guess ever before. Are we seeing anything in the chat yet?
Yes, we have one response saying 9,000.
Okay, 9,000 pounds, did they say, or kilograms?
They didn't say.
Okay, maybe they can add the unit.
Pounds, 9,000 pounds.
Okay, anyone else want to take a guess? While you think about it, I'll also ask a second question. What does this number need to be for us to have climate sanity? So one is what we are currently emitting now. And what does it need to be in 5 or 10 years for us to avoid utter global scale catastrophe?
So
Are they-
Kritee, excuse me, I'm so sorry. I was just going to give you another couple of numbers people have put in if you can't see the chat.
Please, okay, I'll actually, yeah. So someone said 9,000 pounds. I can see the chat now. Thank you, Aris. Someone said 30,000 pounds. Someone said 9 tons. And Grace has written 200 pounds. Grace, did you mean what does it need to be when we reduce it, when things are better?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, so we are seeing a wide range of responses here. I'll tell you the answer. We are currently emitting average person living in America, even if you live simply, it's around 60,000 pounds of carbon dioxide every year. Maybe if you live simply in a one room studio, a tiny house, maybe it's like 40,000. It's still a lot. What does it need to be? Average in next 5 to 10 years is 5,000 pounds. It's a huge thing. It's hard for us to wrap our heads around that. Okay. So with that, let me share my screen and go over this. You will see explanation of this stuff in other places. As I said, we need to go from 60,000 to 5,000 pounds carbon dioxide equivalents in next 10 years. And this change of our personal footprint, we possibly cannot do it by ourselves. We can make ourselves hermits, we can go live up in the mountains, we can stop traveling altogether, we can have a total plant-based diet. It still won't happen without systemic work on 132 trillion pounds of global emissions, right? Planet will not notice your or mine a few thousand pounds a year when the problem is of trillions of pounds. Yeah? But the personal doesn't get done without the collective push, and the collective is meaningless without our individual lives aligning with it. Okay? So if you want more details of the science here, I will send these slides and you will also have the recording. There is very good explanation for all of this if needed. Sorry. So what I want to show here, I only have 2-3 more graphs. I won't spend more time on science, but what I want to show you here is if we don't have a climate policy, the global emissions will keep going up, right? And we could go up to 5 degrees Celsius change, we could go up to 10, we just don't know. This pathway of this yellowish brown or green or purple pathways, these are pathways to global level catastrophe. What we need is that by year 2100, for most of our island nations not to drown, we need to decrease these emissions according to these red and blue curves here. And what it means in the next 10 years is, that's what I gave you the number, right? Right now we are around here at this, these are global 60 billion tons of emissions, and they need to go down to at least 30 billion tons in next 10 years or 9 years. It's on basis of this I gave you that number for average American. Okay. Now when people see this, some people say, well, this is India and China's problem. America and Europe are doing better now. I want you to see that the units are not in thousands of pounds here, they are units in tons. USA, this was in 2005, USA still continues to lead per person emissions. India and China are right here. India and China's emissions have increased in last decade, but India is at the level where average American needs to be in 10 years. Okay? We have a lot to learn from India. There is poverty, there is deprivation, there is corruption, but an average Indian knows how to live simply. So talk about learning lessons from people of color. Yes, we live in colder climate here in India. Things are the tropical conditions. They don't need heating the way we do, but even after taking that into account, our collective footprints are very high. Am I seeing some questions in the chat? Yes, okay. I'm just agreeing with all the things. Iris and Jordan, if you see a pressing question, I'm happy to stop. I'll keep going for now. Okay. So what do we need to do? Without getting into more details, what we need to do to stop this damage, this carnage, to keep it in the ground. When we say keep it, it means carbon. Keep all the carbon in the ground. Don't allow any more coal, oil, and gas to come out of the ground. If it's in the ground, let's leave it there. And on top of it, add it to the ground. Add soil carbon. Build up soil carbon. Grow food in a way that builds soil carbon. Right? That's the fundamental mantra. In addition to that, we need to ration transport. It's not just about electric vehicles. No, 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 no. We need to live our lives in a way where we don't require that much travel. We do need to let go of meat industry. It's cruel for animals, it's terrible for climate, and most cases very bad for our health as well. Okay? So that's just like forget which specific pathways we take. This is the fundamental things. And it's quite drastic. We don't hear that clarity coming from our politicians. This is the last bit of technical slide here. It looks very complicated, but I'll walk you through it. There is one myth that bugs me like no other. And that myth is that we have already crossed the tipping point and all we need is to prepare for uh, dying. There are a lot of groups that say all we can do is adaptation, right? No, 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 no. In our planet as a system has multiple tipping points. What I am showing you on this slide is multiple processes that make life possible on our planet. Amazon rainforest is like lungs of the planet. Amazon sucks up carbon dioxide and produces oxygen. Yeah. We have these ocean that are doing their dance, and the motion of the waters and winds maintains these energy gradients which allow different gases to mix for warm water to come up at right places and the cold water to be sucked into ocean system and so on. Yeah. And each of these life supporting systems have their own tipping points, not just one, but multiple. Amazon rainforest has multiple tipping points in itself. Arctic sea ice has multiple tipping points in itself, and Antarctica has multiple tipping points in itself. It is true that some tipping points have been tipped. We will lose Arctic sea ice no matter what we do today. Even if we stopped all emissions of carbon dioxide, Arctic sea ice will be completely gone in next few summers. Right? So yes, some tipping points have been crossed, but there is a lot more that we can do. So as a scientist, I am very sad when I hear this narrative that all we can do is to adapt to a dying planet. We need to do everything we can to stop these other tipping points from being crossed. There is a lot more power that we have that we are not claiming if we only go with the narrative that all we can do is adapt. Does that make sense? I just want to show this picture because this is a beautiful depiction of how our oceans dance. This is the Arctic meridional circulation that comes from African coast and swirls around South America and North America and goes to Europe. It's a very critical function on planetary system, and it is slowing down. It is getting hurt because of climate crisis, but it has not collapsed. And it's up to us to protect these planetary systems. So the summary of this section is it is late, but it is not too late. We have crossed some tipping points. Gaia's lungs and heart are hurting. They really are hurting. But we must create islands of sanity in the midst of chaos. We must resist. We must resist. Okay? Let me stop here, take a breath, and really take a breath and see if there are any science questions before we move on to next parts.
I'd like to follow up on Ruby's last point, because while she was talking and while you continue with this presentation, I'm realizing that part of the koan of the Dharma of Resistance is the wisdom to know what to resist and what not to resist. And it seems like the resistance is made up of a lot of non-resistance, and that it's our own resistance to projections about the future or whatever, our own fears, that actually makes it hard for us to resist what we need to resist. It's kind of a convoluted question, but I'd like to hear, I know you've thought a lot more about that, so I'm curious how much of that resistance is made up of non-resistance.
I actually haven't thought about that in these terms, how much of resistance is made up of non-resistance. Why don't I let that question percolate, Jiva? Maybe you have more thoughts. Can I just bring us back to science questions for now? We'll have a lot more time at the end to think about this. So I'm writing it down for myself. Let's just check if there are science questions, and we'll come back to this. It's a beautiful question.
Joel, would you like to ask your question? You can just unmute yourself.
Thank you, Jordan. Bless you, Kritee. I just feel your heart so busted open, and I just deeply appreciate the grace with which you're sitting in the fire right now and offering this rich blend of science and the trauma work. I really, really want to celebrate and honor this message and hope this gets out there in a larger way. My question isn't so much a science one as, and that's why I lowered my hand, but since Jordan brought me on, I'll just put it out. It's more a science of how we shift consciousness on a collective level. I appreciate that you're saying that the deep adaptation scenarios and that we're sliding off the cliff, you know, that we're not there and we need to resist as much as we can. But, you know, for me, you know, for 40 years, I've struggled with how do we shift consciousness on the collective level swiftly enough, which clearly is, you know, what brings us all to the Dharma, and being equipped with the right data sets and slides and capacity to communicate and deal with our own trauma and help others to do that is a piece of it. But given how fragile the system is and how critical the tipping points are that haven't been flipped yet. What's the science of shifting consciousness on the global scale that we need within the time frame that we need to realize that's a koan that I've sat with for decades now, and I welcome your download, your mana'o on that. Bless you.
Could you ask me easier questions, please? I mean, Joel, I can tell you what we are experimenting with. I
Yeah.
really, of course, cannot claim that we have a recipe to shift consciousness fast enough that these tipping points will not be crossed, right? Uh, so I always say, and we need adaptation. I've been saying this in this talk itself. We need capacities to grieve. We need capacities to hold our past and ongoing and future trauma, and we have to resist. And I will come back to both what you asked and what Jiva brought up at the end, um, because I have a few more sections to cover. Maybe some of these things will get answered, and then we'll have time for discussion at the end. Is it okay for me to move on if there are no science questions? Definitely heard both of you. Um, okay, so this is the third challenge that is not unknown to any of you, but it's just important uh, to highlight. Remember that mother having 3 tasks and she manages them in one trip. This is our third challenge as global citizens. This is a photograph from India. Women already walk for hours in rural India to get water. Okay? It falls mostly on women, this task of collecting basic supplies. 2 years ago, a city of 10 million, Chennai in India, completely ran out of drinking water. We have not even, we haven't reached a plateau of climate crisis. We're still going. If you think about, well, who will bear the burden of what's in front of us? Millennials and younger generations are facing scariest financial future of any generation since Great Depression. Richest 10% produce top 50% of emissions, and the poorest 50% only do about 10. And here's a compilation of things I like to say on relationship of colonialism and racism with climate crisis. Black and brown people around the world have caused least harm. They will suffer the most. They're already suffering the most. COVID crisis caused by a virus gone rogue is a result of ecological crisis, and developing countries will continue to suffer most even when all of us in US are vaccinated. Black and brown people are considered side dish in mainstream environmental NGOs. And we need a lot of atonement, lot of grieving. Jiva has been talking about truth and reconciliation circles. Whatever language we use for this, a lot of grieving and healing is needed just around what's happened to people of color around the world. And as I was referring to earlier, Black and brown people Not always, not in all conditions, but in a lot of situations, especially indigenous folks who still are living in active relationship with land, have teachings that white folks need to face chaos and collapse. And the culture and ancestral knowledge of people of color has been subjugated. That's the direct cause of climate crisis, in my view. And they have called for financial reparations. I think of this challenge of healing, racial healing, repair, reparations as the third fundamental challenge. Okay, so challenge number 1 is trauma. Challenge number 2 is the scale of ecological crisis. Challenge number 3, in my scientific way of giving you bullet points, is reparations. Okay, so now let's talk about connections between these challenges. Because I'm a scientist and I like to work with equations, you'll see that equation mentality here in next few slides, right? So first thing, as I already hinted at, is that systemic racism and white supremacy, for me, is a mother of climate crisis, right? So we named 3 challenges, and I'm now saying, how are these 3 challenges related to each other? Then, because of this, there is a growing body of work now which is saying we can't solve for climate now and then come to racial healing, when racial healing is the racial crisis. Racial inequities are the cause of climate crisis. You can't do it in reverse order. A lot of privileged people say, let's deal with our plane sinking for now. We'll deal with the seat problem later. You know, like the inequities in the plane, we'll deal with that later. Let's just stop our plane from collapsing right now or going down. No, no, no. There is an amazing researcher, Ian Henny Lopez out of Stanford, who says most important thing you can do to strengthen climate movement is to fight racism against black and brown people. And he's not just saying it because of some kind of emotional response. There is a very beautiful, detailed analysis of data and how not working for racial justice undermines climate movement. And I'm going to send these resources to you so you can explore them. One of them, these videos that I'm referring to here, the second video with Adam Elliott Cooper, that's a conversation with activists from Extinction Rebellion. That's a 3-way conversation between Adam, Ian Henny Lopez, and Extinction Rebellion co-founders. And it's the fundamental point is you can't solve for climate now and then come to racial healing. Okay. Then this last connection, crucial, is that the trauma that we talked about, it gives us shame. And that combined with our fear of what's happening going to happen in our future, it creates, as we were talking about earlier today, creates this fight, flight, and freeze response in our system, right? So that little things take us out of our windows of tolerance. And we are either frozen, we are depressed, we can't act at all, or we are acting out of anxiety. No, there isn't the optimum response window, you know. A neurobiologist would call it windows of tolerance. We are not in that optimum zone where we can have an engaged, creative, and courageous response. And so we just keep perpetuating this. Trauma becomes an engine of oppression, and ultimately it further traumatizes all of us, regardless of our race and socioeconomic background. Okay. So this is the last part, and I'm going to come back to this course that I am going to be co-facilitating. Actually, one of my co-facilitators is in the room. Raz Gormley, will say hello to him after I stop sharing my slides. What I am experimenting with, what my group of friends are experimenting with, we call that Dharma of Resistance, right? And that Dharma of Resistance is based on three things. I don't know if it can change global consciousness. I have given up hopes for changing global consciousness, frankly. I really have. And I take refuge in that surrender. Okay, I take refuge in that surrender. My hope is just to have islands of sanity in a sea of chaos. I have given up trying to control the whole chaos. And if there are enough islands of sanity in a sea of chaos that are connected to each other, maybe we will shift the tide. And what does the island of sanity need to have? I, 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 I am not a philosopher. I'm not. I'm not a scholar in that sense. I'm a scientist. I like my equations, and so my three-part equation for what these islands of sanity need to have is these three things. Number one is trauma resilient. I call them healing individuals. I have, please note that I haven't used the phrase healed individuals or enlightened individuals. I don't think we have time for all of us to get enlightened and then look at these problems. These are healing individuals in relationship to each other who know how to hold each other's trauma, who are informed not just about their own trauma, right? So Kritee being informed of Kritee's trauma is not enough. If Kritee wants to build an island of sanity and she is in relationship with Jordan and Iris and Jiva and Joel, I need to know about your trauma and your windows of tolerance. What triggers you? What pains you? How do I help you when you are in fight, flight, or freeze? Okay? So that's part number one. What we will talk about in this course, Dharma of Resistance, part number one is that. Part number two is how do we begin to live more simply and with mutual aid? If you haven't heard this phrase, mutual aid, it will make sense in a second. In India right now, the government system, the medical system is totally collapsed. Totally collapsed. Governments are refusing to be responsible for anything. Oxygen supply, oxygen production, supply of injections, supply of basic medicines, fever medicines, steroid medicines. Okay. What is happening is people are being creative and they are supporting each other. Like if people are going to survive this crisis, it's not going to be because of any corporations or governments. It's going to be because they stood shoulder to shoulder with each other in mutual aid. Mutual aid is nothing but community helping each other. And having a shared village life where we don't have to own multiple cars or big houses or multiple all kinds of gear to feel less shame about ourselves. That shared simple life, right? That's the second pillar. What do we say yes to? What is our strategic yes to? And then the third part is, what do we say strategic no to? What do we say strategic no to? Uh, this course was supposed to start on May 1st, but because of the crisis in India and many sleepless nights that I've personally gone through, our team decided that let's postpone it a little bit. It's gonna start. um it's gonna start on May 15th now, and I want to highlight the image here on the right. It's a group of ants that have built a bridge with their own bodies to cross uh, a chasm there. Yeah, and the point is that if we really know each other, if we really know how to stand up with each other, stand in solidarity, we can do hard things. And this trauma that I have been talking about, it comes in the way of me holding on to another ant with my dear life. We have forgotten how to belong. We have forgotten how to truly need each other, right? And I find myself these days repeatedly saying, I don't want to build any more new connections. I'm just trying to be with people who are in my immediate vicinity. Just how do I hold on to the ant next to me for my dear life? How do I know her truly well? The animating questions of this course are: can we take inconvenient and risky actions necessary to minimize suffering? How might taking such actions become more normal, more healing, more holistic and beautiful? And how can these actions authentically and skillfully express our deepest spiritual truths? I I have Joel and Jiva's questions in my mind. I have, as I said, I have given up on trying to change the global consciousness. Right now, my focus is uh, a few people standing in solidarity with each other. Having the global analysis, yes, but standing up in solidarity with each other and standing up for one piece of land, one part of the rivers, one part of this fabric that we are part of. I cannot hold, I don't know what to do about the whole system, right? But how do I work with the trauma that we have in our immediate communities and compost some of that to fuel our local movement? So in this course, which I invite all of you to consider in any capacity you are able to consider, we will give people pathways to build that relational soil. Like, how do I really stand with the ant next to me? The ant next to me. How do I be in relationship? Just like you can't have a garden without healthy soil, one of my dearest friends, Maria Tolero, has coined this term called relational soil. You can't build a movement without building your relational soil. Too many activists are traumatized and they try to work, they don't address their trauma and shame, and they just keep acting without any attention to that underlying trauma. What we can do instead, at least in an ideal world, is to take some of that trauma and use that compost to fuel our movement. But you need to do that deliberately. And there are things that can help us do that. We will help teams with grief and rage work, at least the basic fundamentals of it. We will try to work with what kind of information flow can work with within such small groups, what kind of decision making and working with conflict. Conflict is such a big thing, right? Because we have trauma, conflict comes up. It's natural and it can be composted. Instead, we are so conflict averse that we don't talk about it in healthy ways. It's like suppress it. It's just suppress it. It undermines us, it undermines our movement. So we're gonna look very squarely at conflict and trauma and risk and power issues within groups and then outside with police. Okay? And then there will be some aspects of talking about our relationship with money, because that is a big beast. And on top of all of this, what can be our strategy for taking direct actions? Please remember that I am not talking, I have given up on trying to reform the whole political system as well. I do not believe that just electing more progressive candidates is going to do it, unless all of them are like AOC or, something of that order. I have given up on political candidates. I firmly believe unapologetically that we need more people standing up for the planet, just like indigenous people are standing up for line 3 right now, right? So that's what I'm talking about. But to do those actions right, we need action strategy. We need to understand our movement ecosystem. We need to understand which other ants are there in the vicinity so that our bridge keeps getting longer and longer over time. So I'm gonna just take 2 more minutes and then open up for our discussion. As I said, this course you cannot come by yourself. You have to bring in at least 2 more friends with you. That's when we evaluate the application of the group. Last date to apply is May 2nd now. And you can look up the dates later on, but we are trying to give time between 2 formal classes so that these teams can meet within with their small team and practice the pathways we invite them to explore. It's not the course is going to be very it's a workshop style course. It wouldn't have lecturing the way I'm speaking right now. And yeah, teams will meet for 1.5 to 2 hours between classes. Okay. I am going to actually stop here. I'm not gonna talk about line 3 because I've probably gone slower than I should. Line 3, I pray that all of you already know about it. Indigenous women leaders have been calling us for help, and I take a great deal of inspiration, my whole team does, on how they are organizing and how they are standing up for their waters and their land. And so our course will be deriving inspiration from line 3 warriors as well. I see that Ken has already put the link for Dharma of Resistance in the chat, but I invite you to just take one breath and I am here and Raz is here. Raz is my co-facilitator for Dharma of Resistance. Raz, can you just wave? Thank you. So I still have Joel and Jiva's questions. And I'm also curious if there are questions about Dharma of Resistance. And I'm actually gonna bring the questions Jiva and Joel asked back to them because now they've heard what I am passionate about. Maybe there is some answers embedded in what I've shared. But any questions about the course, you can also email us later on. And I'm especially happy to get questions from people who haven't shared their voice in this circle so far. Yes, Jean.
Thank you, Kritee. Despite such awful news, it's a relief to hear it openly. And your beautiful way of sharing it, along with the grief, helps me. I feel the tears. Yeah.
Thank you, Jean. Tears are necessary. I mean, if Joel, one answer to your question, how to change consciousness, is just to be honest and design communities that can bear witness to each other's tears. Joanna Macy and others have given us beautiful teachings on how to witness grief in a way that it doesn't further traumatize us. That has to be fundamental piece. That is not enough in itself. I have seen grief communities that engage in grief work just keep doing grief work and grief work. It's like, no, purpose of grief work is not to re-traumatize ourselves by remembering everything that is not kind and beautiful. I think what sometimes I find missing in grief communities that are doing grief work is that they're not combining it with really radical actions. So, as much as we want to be aware of our past and present and future trauma and witness the grief, if it's not combined with radical actions, I get disappointed by that. And our dream is that with this Dharma of Resistance kind of framework, we do both adaptation and mitigation. Yeah, I was going to ask Iris or Jordan, maybe there is a weaving that you can offer based on previous 2 sessions, or any questions that come up for you, Iris and Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of weaving to do, and this has been beautiful so far this morning. Just a couple things, I mean, our first presenter, Yangtze Rinpoche, grew up in India, and he talked about the changes he had seen over his life. And I think one of his major themes he kept coming back to over and over again, well, twofold. One was to heal the earth and plant lots of trees and, take care of it, but also to do this inner work that you're, is so multifaceted, the inner work. And his approach was kind of classical Buddhist approach, and you've brought in this trauma piece, which is so essential. And then Roger and Fern last month talked about the importance of listening to indigenous perspectives, and because these older cultures have been around for so long, and yeah, that's I don't know, Iris, anything else come up for you, or anybody else who was at any of the previous talks? Please join in the weaving. This is a mutual conversation.
I would like to just let you know how appreciative I am, and I expect all of us are, in terms of your bringing to bear the importance of racial justice and racism and white supremacy and those systems of oppression that underlie and are, part of, if not, the whole underpinning of the climate crisis that we're in. And not exactly sure about the weaving of the other talks as much as you presented so much. There are so many aspects to all of this. And the idea that none of us can do everything. We can't change the world's consciousness, but all of us can do something. And it's so clear that to do it together is the most powerful way. So thank you. And we do invite others to reflect or ask questions or.
Yeah.
Cheryl, would you like to speak up?
I would. First of all, happy to be here and thank you for your presentation and words and work and labor. Kritee, am I pronouncing that right? Kritee? Okay, great. So this isn't so much a question as a comment about, where do I start? Well, thinking about the impact of individual actions and thinking about the impact of not just disproportionately, it's like I can't find a big enough word to describe the impact of, I'll just say for right now, the impact of the US as a whole on like the whole world, the entire system, and that due to the, for me, just a perspective for me is due to the internalization of all tying this into colonialism. So one of the big impacts of that is individualism. And with individualism, there's a way in connecting this with the ants. So there is a way that the silo effect happens. And so, and if I combine that with all the messages, the mass messaging that is perpetuated throughout the world by the different corporations, by the owning class, those who control so much of the resources, and there's that hook of like we too can have those resources, as in controlling resources equals happiness. And so with that individual thing and the colonialism and the internalization of it, it's like, and I'm going to say we, just the royal kind of we, can't see that when we breathe, that has just breathing has an impact. Like every single thing we do impacts all of us. And thinking in that way, that means each of us can impact things in a good way, in a beautiful outcome for all of us. But it's like there's a way that we don't see the whole picture, that we're all intrinsically connected, and what we do matters. And so someone who, let's say economically, let's say they shop at like Walmart or some other place where prices are low. So kind of connecting the economics of it. And so we get hooked into the system and to the individualism, trying to survive, because that's how we've been set up against each other. And so how does someone who, goes to the corner store, buys a Twinkie or whatever, and then just drops it on the street, the packaging, or just, so there's all things we get caught up in. And I think there's a lot of moving parts, and economics also has to do with, and also the marginalized communities. And so, and as you talked about earlier, like not trying to convince others, because we can't in the end. How can what I do and my sphere of influence, just live in a way and do actions in the way that people will question, oh, as opposed to trying to tell people what to do. Because I feel like unless people see that they are directly impacted by these things and that there's something we can do, then business will continue as usual. So this is some kind of my reflections and what you're saying and just kind of my own work and stuff. So I just wanted to share that. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Cheryl. There's a lot, many different threads. I heard individualism. I heard getting caught up in the status quo, and I do think that individual spheres of influence, in my view, that I feel frustration around that. I don't, for me, that model doesn't work. I think we even if we can't create a tribe of 1,000 ants that agree with us, small tribes do increase our spheres of influence. Individual spheres of influence part is what I am pushing back on. And I want to just take this time. I know we are at 11:30 there on the Pacific Coast, on the West Coast. There is you're right. There is so much that can be done. Everyone picks up one thing that they can do, and the focus of myself and my friends is how to keep it in the ground. Right? I forgot to say this earlier. The McKibben and others have written about we have too much carbon sitting in the ground, and fossil fuel companies want to extract it and burn it, and the planet cannot afford it, right? There is 5 to 10 more times more carbon inside the ground than climate science says we can burn. And keeping that in the ground will mean that we need resistance. No matter what you do, what other adaptations you do, I want all of you to think about resistance as well. Please change your individual lifestyles and think about resistance, right? Because without resistance, that's not going to happen. The question is, this is Buddha's teaching here, how are we going to resist? How is important. How are we going to become the ants that stand with each other, and not just each other, but with the police that might be facing us with tear gas and bullets? Are we going to demonize them? Are we going to make an other out of them? Or are we going to sincerely try to change their hearts? Right? So the one part is standing up with each other in small teams. And a crucial point I want to make here is the size of 3 to 7 people is really crucial. We are not wanting to change 100 people. We want to change groups of 3 to 7 people at a time. You know why? Because human psychology, human social psychology fields teach us that it is hard for us to focus on more than 7 relationships at a time. If we have 8 people, 9 people in the room, the number of dyadic relationships you have goes exponential. You can't manage eye contact and care for more than 7 people easily, right? It's like if I'm maintaining eye contact with Jiva or Joel, that like it takes psychic energy to maintain that connection and really know how he's doing, how Raz is doing, how Kim is doing. And you add more and more people, it creates a vibe where I am no one's, right? So we have come very carefully to this number, 3 to 7 people. Work with those relationships, create your relational soil, and some of us will create beautiful actions of resistance. That's the framework of this course. Jordan, how are we doing with time? Can we take 5 more minutes or do we have to stop now?
No, we don't have to stop.
Okay, I wanted to honor your thing. And I know we still have some questions remaining, but I wanted to invite my co-facilitator Raz if he just wants to say hello. Raz is a direct action trainer. He's gotten involved in many different actions, including the one that happened in Seattle area with the kayaks. You, Raz, did you go up the? I forget. Were you up on the bridges or were you on the?
Yeah, so it was in Portland, where 13 of us rappelled from the St. John's Bridge to block Shell's Arctic icebreaker from going up to drill in the Chukchi Sea. The Shell No campaign, yes, exactly. And we hung there for 2 days. And we were successful in stopping the ship initially. Eventually they did get through. But our goal was, was to create as long a delay as possible and also raise as much awareness as possible about this. So I'll just say that, I began my journey in this work through kind of an expansion of my own spiritual practice. I started to explore a spiritual practice as a way to as a way to survive and a way to heal myself because of my own trauma from my early life and through much of my life, and issues that affected me every day. And so in order to find some peace, I started to explore my own spiritual practice, and I started to explore yoga and sitting, and really just looking within myself for peace and for answers. And that gave me, that was enough for a long time. And then I started to witness other people's suffering in the world and wonder how I could affect change in those situations. And that's what felt true to me, is that my own spiritual practice gave me a platform to stand on, to pull others out of the torrent and to offer them a hand. And so, I really identify strongly with the idea of having my own practice of sitting and affecting change in the world, and through exploring that within myself, making the world a better place. But at some point, I realized that there were others who were suffering in the real world, in real time, around me. And that, in a sense, I was, it's like my neighbor's house was on fire, and there was a fire hose to my right between me and their house. And they were asking me for help, and I was walking to my left to my cushion. And I decided for me that the best way that I could help them is maybe to pick up the hose and to help them put out the fire on their house. And so, I agree with Kritee in that we never know how, we cannot see all the answers, and we don't know how to change the global consciousness, but we can reach more people than we think. We have more power than we think to influence situations. And like a stone going into the water, we can never see all of the ripples that come from that, and all of the lives we will touch, and all of the consciousness that we will change with our actions. And so I've seen this individually as a trainer, and how many lives I've touched, and how many people I see doing direct action to make the world a better place, and to combat climate change and racial genocide. And I've seen it as was mentioned in the bridge action, where we were not successful in stopping that boat, but We delayed it long enough that they were unsuccessful in finding oil before winter came in the Arctic, and they had to leave, and it cost them millions and millions of dollars. And then we raised so much awareness through that action and inspired so many other actions that the Obama administration canceled all leases in the Arctic. And so it made it off limits to drill in the Arctic. The Trump administration tried to overturn this, and the Supreme Court actually upheld the decision, citing that it could lead to climate catastrophe, and so I have seen the actions of a small number of people really grow and shift consciousness to affect something on an international, on a global scale, and that inspires me to keep going. I don't know if everything that I do will have an impact, but I feel better when I try.
And that's such a good place to end from our side, unless there are pressing questions. One of my favorite words in Buddhist canon is Bodhisattva, and Bodhisattva is like it's like we take vows to do impossible things. We try to relieve suffering of all beings. That is inherently impossible, right? And yesterday I was in email connection with Joan Halifax, and she and I were exchanging really intense emails around situation in India and Nepal. She has a community she's connected with in Nepal. Joan Halifax is a Zen teacher, if you don't know. And she was like, oh my God, all the work we are doing, the oxygen cylinders we are trying to send there, that's just like a drop in the bucket, It's like nothing, nothing, nothing. And then I sent her a story of this crow that carries water in its beak and is trying to quench fires in a forest with the little water that in his beak. You might say, that's silly, stupid, don't do it. Just make peace with the fires. But I don't think that's an option. Like, doing the right thing regardless of results is definitely one part of this. So, deep breath again, and I welcome your questions and comments after this. I know we haven't answered the big question Jiva asked of what part of resistance is no resistance. Definitely a yes, but I'm afraid I can't formulate a full answer right now. I'll keep thinking about it. Thank you, everyone.